Shalom, and warm greetings from Jerusalem. This is your portion of Israel Vision Review on the Israeli Broadcasting News. Let's look briefly at the top stories. Hezbollah continues clashes in Lebanon for the 5th day in a row. Egyptian intelligence chief Suleiman visits here today and has worked out a so-called ceasefire deal with Hamas. Prime Minister Olmert is battling to remain in office in the midst of an alleged allegations of scandal. Hamas is seeking the media spotlight by turning off 3 turbines for no apparent reason, leaving hundreds of thousands of their people in darkness last night. 1.5 to 2 million souls are sick or starving in Burma. Latet from Israel sends aid. And Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper speaks out on Israel's 60th. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Good evening and welcome to IBA News, coming to you from Jerusalem.
The explosive situations in Gaza and Lebanon were at the center of today's weekly cabinet meeting. For an update, we go now to IBA's diplomatic correspondent, Leah Zinder. Leah, despite the tense security situation, I would imagine that the ongoing investigation against Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was on everyone's minds?
You're absolutely right, Erin. Everybody in the cabinet knows that the earth is shaking under the Prime Minister as never before. So it must have been of some comfort to Olmert when the meeting of Kadima ministers just ahead of the cabinet meeting turned into a massive show of support for Olmert's decision not to step down at this time. The single exception for the second time in less than a week was Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, who had not a single word of support for Olmert. Internal Security Minister Avi Dichter urged his colleagues not to speak ill of the police or the State Attorney's Office, and Olmert was quick to agree with him, saying the investigation must be allowed to take its course. But, Erin, there were grave issues indeed awaiting the ministers when the cabinet did convene, and this especially in the wake of the deadly mortar fire on Israel over the weekend and the scheduled arrival in Israel tomorrow of Egyptian intelligence chief Omar Suleiman. Suleiman will present to Olmert the ceasefire deal that he hammered out with the Palestinian terror groups in Gaza. Israel's position on the ceasefire is this: they will go along with the truce on these conditions, that the Palestinians cease all rocket and mortar fire and all terror attacks from Gaza, and that means not just Hamas. Olmert stressed today that Hamas is responsible for all attacks emanating from Gaza and may not subcontract, as one source put it, to other terror groups. And just as important, the arms smuggling from Egypt into Gaza must come to a complete halt. But as we all know, Erin and Yochanan, there is an ill wind blowing from the north as well, and today military intelligence Chief Major General Amos Yadlin briefed the cabinet on the situation in Lebanon. Yadlin said Israel is closely watching the shift in power there. We must be pragmatic, he said, but there's no need for hysteria. Vice Premier Chaim Ramon said we have to realize that Lebanon is now a Hezbollah state. The reigning government is meaningless. It's all a fiction, he said. And finally, let's hear what Mayor Shitrit had to say about the situation in Lebanon.
I think it's very dangerous. The situation in which, in matter of fact, Iran is sitting on our border, on the northern part of the border, and controlling Lebanon. That had been proved yesterday, when the Hezbollah, matter of fact, put down the government of Lebanon, which had to surround it to demand of Hezbollah. It's very dangerous for the long range, because now everybody understands in the world that Lebanon and the Hezbollah over there is just a long arm of Iran, and that's the way we should relate to it.
Dangerous indeed, and now back to you in the studio in Jerusalem.
All right, thank you, Leah Zinder, our diplomatic correspondent reporting from Tel Aviv. Well, the latest criminal investigation concerning Prime Minister Ehud Olmert continues to simmer. Dennis Zinn brings us the developments.
Morris Talansky, the key witness in the new investigation against Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, may be questioned in court by state prosecutors in the near future. This depending on whether or not the lawyers representing Olmert petition the Supreme Court to overrule the Jerusalem District Court decision to allow the investigation and the ensuing High Court judgment. The Jerusalem court did not set a date for the hearing. However, it did reject the prosecution's request to hold the hearing behind closed doors. The judges explained that the public's right to know overrode all other considerations. They said that the reason why they ruled for the early investigation is because they accepted the state's position that while Tilensky is due to fly back to the United States in the near future, he may not return to Israel for the court hearing at a later date. Police investigators will probably also question again Olmert's former aide Shula Zaken and his one-time law partner Uri Messer. Zaken and Messer are suspected of being party to the alleged funneling of funds from Tilensky to Olmert, when Olmert served as mayor of Jerusalem and minister of trade. Tilensky claims to have passed large sums of money to Olmert over a period of 15 years. Olmert has rejected all charges, saying that he never ever received bribes and never took money for himself. At the same time, he maintains that he relied on Messer's judgment to make sure that all monies received were legal. According to leaks from the police investigation, Zaken is keeping mum, but Messer has reportedly given damaging testimony against his former partner. According to several media reports, Messer is in an emotionally unstable condition. Dennis Zin, IBA News.
A Qassam rocket hit an open area in the western Negev city of Sderot. There were no injuries and no damage caused. The funeral of Jimmy Kedoshim, who was killed in a Palestinian mortar attack last week, took place just a short while ago at Kibbutz Kfar Aza. The 48-year-old was killed in the attack on Friday as he was tending the garden of his home. Kedoshim was a member of Kibbutz Kfar Aza for more than 30 years, and friends described him as a parachuting enthusiast who lifted everyone's morale by continuing to take to the skies despite the ongoing Qassam and mortar fire. Kedoshim was the 13th victim of terrorist fire against Gaza border communities. He leaves behind a wife and 3 children.
Prominent businessman Benny Gaon lost his battle to cancer and died yesterday at the Sourasky Medical Center in Tel Aviv. He was 73. Former Defense Minister Amir Peretz, who was close to Gaon, said the country lost, quote, a titan. Gaon was considered one of the leaders of the Israeli business community. He managed leading Israeli companies during his illustrious career, including Kura Industries, Tadiran, and Blue Square Israel. Recently, his name was mentioned several times as a possible Labor Party candidate for finance minister. Gaon was president of the Israel Cancer Society and chairman and president of B. Gaon Holdings. Gaon, whose brother is popular singer Yoram Gaon, was also active in public service. After the Second Lebanon War, he called for a proper compensation of the reserve soldiers by the business sector and the government. Prime Minister Olmert described Gaon as a man of extraordinary social awareness. In other news, energy officials in Gaza say they have switched off all 3 turbines that had been generating electricity for hundreds of thousands of local residents. The officials placed the blame on Israel, saying that Jerusalem had not provided enough diesel to run the power plant. The IDF spokesman confirmed that Israel did not deliver as much fuel to Gaza as planned because terrorists attacked the crossing depot used to deliver it. During recent months, Israel has limited its ration of fuel and other supplies to Gaza in hopes of pressuring the terrorists to stop firing rockets at the western Negev. Israeli officials insist that Jerusalem continues to supply fuel to Gaza and accuse the power station of attempting to pressure Israel into increasing the deliveries.
Israel continuously sends vital humanitarian goods to the Gaza Strip. There is no logical reason for this power station to be shut down. This is Hamas once again staging an artificial crisis for its own political reasons to the detriment of the Palestinian people.
A Hamas terrorist was killed and another wounded today in an apparent mishap along the border fence with Israel. Hamas identified the dead man as Osama al-Iftal. The terrorist group said that he was killed during a so-called holy mission. The army issued a statement saying that the IDF was not operating in the area at the time of the explosion. And returning now to the Prime Minister's latest legal woes, and we're joined live from our Tel Aviv studio by attorney Michael Partem, the Vice Chairman for Movement for Quality Government in Israel. Michael, welcome.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure.
Now, Michael, your group is calling for the Prime Minister to step down, but what about due process? You know, the notion that a person, from your average citizen to the Prime Minister, is innocent until proven guilty.
Well, I must correct one item. We are not at this stage asking that the Prime Minister resign. We are asking that the investigation be concluded as swiftly as possible. The Prime Minister has indicated that if indicted, he will resign. We think that is an acceptable position, and we look forward to a swift resolution by the Attorney General of this investigation. I have a sneaking suspicion that the virtual waterfall of leaks in this investigation has something to do with many, many people involved wanting this investigation to come to a conclusion as soon as possible. It's not a healthy situation that the public feels that something really bad has taken place, but it's not quite sure what. And we are living in an age of uncertainty relating to the highest official of the government, so that impacts negatively on the operations of the government and obviously on the image of the rule of law in Israel. So our main consideration at this point is to urge the Attorney General to finalize this investigation as quickly as possible.
Michael, isn't the Prime Minister in one of these damned if you do and damned if you don't positions? For example, if he cracks down on the terrorist operating in Gaza, people are going to say he's trying to get the focus off of his political problems. And if he doesn't, people are going to say, well, he's a weak Prime Minister, and therefore he needs to step down. He's distracted by his problems.
Well, we live, unfortunately, in an age not only where the Prime Minister is not above reproach, but he is under almost continuous investigation and has been since very shortly after his election. This is not a healthy situation. We would hope that the Prime Minister would be able to function under this type of cloud. We're happy that things are being investigated. You know, the damned if you do, damned if you don't. If there was not an investigation, if there were not grounds for investigation, we wouldn't be discussing this. So it was a long time ago that Prime Minister Olmert decided to involve himself in activities that would lead to such an investigation. So he has to take upon himself the responsibility, but he also has to take the responsibility for running the country if he feels, and if the cabinet feels. It's not just his decision. His resignation would be the collective resignation of the cabinet. So if the cabinet and the Knesset feel that he is not capable of running the government and being prime minister, they must act. It is their duty as cabinet members, as elected officials, to act swiftly to replace him or to bring about a change in the situation. So it's not just Olmert here that's on the firing line. The whole government, his whole government, every member of that government and every faction of every party in that government has to be asking themselves, can this government do what it has to do? It has a mandate from the people, and it has to fulfill that mandate. If it feels it can't fulfill that mandate, if it feels that the investigations are severely hampering its ability to govern, then it must take action. And it's not only the Prime Minister that is at fault here.
All right, Michael Partum with the Movement for Quality Government. We'll see how it plays out. Thank you, Michael. Officials in Jerusalem said Israel will not get involved in the latest outbreak of fighting in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Beirut was quiet, but fighting did break out between pro- and anti-government forces in northern Lebanon today. IBA's Eli Wagalanter has more.
Israel is closely watching events in Lebanon, but has no reason to intervene for the moment. This, according to Deputy Defense Minister Matan Vilnai, who told Israel Radio today that one of the worst possible outcomes of the recent fighting in Lebanon, which saw Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorists seize control of much of West Beirut, was for Iran to take control, via allied militias, of Lebanon and the Gaza Strip. Vilnai said that Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak recently declared that Egypt already has a border with Iran with the Gaza Strip. For us, it's even worse, Vilnai said, because it's not only the Gaza Strip, but also Lebanon in the north. Israel, he said, does not have to intervene, but has to keep its eyes open. Yisrael Beitenu Chairman Avigdor Lieberman is calling for an urgent meeting by all relevant government bodies to discuss the situation. Hezbollah's coup in Lebanon proves that Iran has completed the construction of 2 advanced posts close to Israel, Lebanon and Gaza, said Lieberman. The situation requires special preparations by the defense establishment, the IDF, the government, and the Knesset. In Lebanon today, government troops patrolled the streets of Beirut following the withdrawal of Hezbollah gunmen from the capital over the weekend. But in the northern city of Tripoli, fierce battles raged between rival clans. A security official said the fighting was between Sunni supporters of the Western-backed government and members of an Alawite sect loyal to Hezbollah. He added that thousands were fleeing and a number of people have been wounded. Residents of Tripoli could hear heavy machine gun firing and the thump of exploding rocket-propelled grenades, some of which fell inside the city. One woman was killed in the clashes, bringing the death toll across the country over the past 5 days of violence to 38. Ellie Wogelanter, IBA News.
The crisis in Lebanon drew the attention of Arab League foreign ministers today. The group held an emergency session in Cairo at the request of Saudi Arabia. There's growing fear among regional Sunni Muslim states over the influence that the Shiite Republic of Iran has in strife-torn Lebanon through its proxy Hezbollah terror organization.
And joining us now in the studio to talk about the situation in Lebanon is Middle East expert Dr. Jonathan Spire of the Global Research and International Affairs Center, Herzliya. Dr. Spire, welcome. Is Hezbollah flexing its muscle in Lebanon to prove that it's a player to be reckoned with, or was this a coup attempt, or is it a coup attempt in the formative stages?
It was not a coup attempt in the sense that Hezbollah was not attempting to take power in Lebanon. Hezbollah does not wish to replace the government in Lebanon. What happened was that Hezbollah felt itself to be under threat because the March 14th government, or one member of it, namely Mr. Walid Jumblat, issued a number of statements in the previous days suggesting an attempt by the government to try and crack down on elements of Hezbollah's military infrastructure. There were two issues. Firstly, the issue of a number of cameras discovered on runway 17 at Rafik Hariri International Airport, apparently placed there by Hezbollah, and the government wished to replace the security chief at the airport, Wafik Shuker, as a result of that. And secondly, the issue of the private telecommunications network maintained by Hezbollah. The government wanted to launch a judicial investigation into that network. Hezbollah saw these two moves as a threat to its military infrastructure. It decided to respond with extreme harshness. It put men onto the streets, took West Beirut, and everything which happened derived from that. So this wasn't a coup attempt in the sense Hezbollah were trying to take power. They were trying to make sure that the government does not dare to cross those red lines in which it seems to interfere with Hezbollah's military infrastructure and the complete freedom of action which Hezbollah and its allies demand for themselves in terms of that military infrastructure.
With all of this activity taking place, there were some fears that were expressed about southern Lebanon because it's on the border with Israel, and regarding the UNIFIL troops that are placed there right now in the buffer zone. Now, is it overly alarmist to speculate? Is it possible in the near future at any time that Hezbollah could take over the south and push the UN troops out?
Well, Hezbollah has been, of course, busily arming itself and rearming itself since the 2006 war, and it's now reckoned to possess more weaponry than it had at the moment of that war's beginning. So there is always a possibility at any moment that Hezbollah, no doubt in cooperation with its Iranian patrons, could choose to heat up the situation in the south. Could Hezbollah take over the south? Look, it's very important to understand that Hezbollah is active in the south in any case. Hezbollah has never gone away, even as a result of the presence of UNIFIL, even as a result of Resolution 1701. They are there, they've changed their modus operandi, they're no longer patrolling openly in the south, but they're there. This is their heartland, or one of their heartlands, and they are very, very active there. And should they choose to do so, they can begin to heat up that area of the country. And I very much doubt, I think everybody very much doubts, that the UNIFIL troops, with all due respect to them, will have very much say in the matter if and when Hezbollah choose to take that course of action. Dr.
Spire, we have half a minute left. How or what, if anything, should Israel do in reaction to what's taking place in Lebanon now?
I think Israel is correctly doing what it needs to do, which is to keep a very close eye on the situation. Israel cannot be seen to be the force taking an active role in backing the March 14th government. Israel is watching very carefully what's happening and waiting for developments. If and when things deteriorate, Israel needs to know what's going on, and then it will know how to react.
Dr. Spire of the Gloria Center, thank you as always for sharing your analysis with us this evening.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. In other news, the first Israeli aid team has arrived in a cyclone-ravaged Myanmar in an effort to assist survivors of last week's tropical cyclone, which left up to 100,000 people dead. The general manager of the Israeli nonprofit Latet Humanitarian Relief Organization, Eran Weintraub, told IBA News that aid workers from the organization managed to reach the capital, Yangon, and have reported that the situation there is devastating. The Foreign Ministry confirmed that $70,000 of medical aid is due to be shipped on Thursday as Israel's part in the international effort to prevent a public health disaster threatening the lives of 1.5 million people with disease and famine. Meanwhile, the military junta continues to block international supplies and aid workers from entering the nation.
There were many times that the military regime has used the international help for their own sake. We have had in the past that there were many assistance from the international organizations kept in the storage and then not distributed properly because they don't have the expertise. What they have is the highly corrupted officials using their power to abuse and to make rich out of it.
We're starting to get reports that there's aid being distributed with the names of military leaders and VIPs plastered all over the aid packages. You know, there's people who are very concerned now that the reason this aid is being, the aid workers are being blocked is so that the military can deliver aid selectively and so that they can appropriate the aid and pretend that it was from them in the first place.
If you would like to make a contribution to the relief effort through LITET, you can call 1-700-504033.
In other news today, a march commemorating 63 years since the Allied victory over the Nazis in Europe was held in Jerusalem. Hundreds of veterans took part in the parade, which began at Zion Square in the center of the city and continued to City Hall at Safra Square. Most of the marchers were veterans of the Soviet Red Army. They were joined by Absorption Minister Yaakov Edry, Opposition Leader Benjamin Netanyahu, Jerusalem Mayor Uri Polyansky, and businessman Arkady Gaidamak.
Police are recommending that several managers and board members from the Mercantile Bank be indicted for negligence and for failing to uphold regulations set by the Bank of Israel. This in connection with the case of bank employee Eti Alon, who is serving time in prison for embezzling millions from the bank. Police are set to turn the case over to the state attorney's office, which will decide whether or not to issue an indictment.
Stock Talk now. Tel Aviv Exchange was mixed on this first day of the trading week. Blue chips declined, high-tech gained. Let's take a look at the late afternoon numbers.
The IBA weather team says we can expect Sharav heat wave conditions over the mountains and inland areas tomorrow and warmer than usual temperatures along the coast. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours.
That's all for today. We'll be back tomorrow at this same time on this same channel.
Until then, thanks for watching and shalom from Jerusalem.
Shalom from Jerusalem and your edition of Israel Vision Review on the Israel Broadcasting Authority's news. All eyes are on Lebanon. The Sunnis are fleeing for their lives while the Shiites, or Hezbollah, are working to take over. The situation is explosive, and Hezbollah is seen as the long arm of Iran. Egypt has stated, "We have a border with Iran where Gaza meets Egypt." Lebanese Prime Minister Senora has said, even the Israel enemy never dared to do to Beirut what Hezbollah has done. He spoke as his pro-government fighters raged for the fifth day across Lebanon. At least 53 people have been killed in the fighting. Arab foreign ministers called for an immediate ceasefire to quell the worst sectarian violence since Lebanon's 1975 to 1990 civil war. The Israel Defense Forces have expressed concerns of the growing instability in Lebanon and say that it may lead to the dissolution of the UN peacekeeping force in that area. Hezbollah has gained control and will have at least a third of the cabinet, granting them the power to veto major government decisions. Vice Premier in Israel, Haim Ramon, said, Lebanon must be treated as a Hezbollah state. Everything that happens there is the responsibility of Hezbollah. The country is the heartland of the terrorists, and Lebanon's government has become irrelevant. The idea of an independent government apart from Hezbollah in Lebanon is entirely fictitious, he said. And at this time, I want to offer you a DVD entitled The Violence of Lebanon, which takes you back to that civil war, and then also to the Israeli involvement in Lebanon, the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, and the Israeli war 2 years ago, just so you understand that this is a smoldering fire that has never ceased burning. Egyptian intelligence, Chief Suleiman, visiting briefly from Egypt today, is having breakfast this morning in the home of Defense Minister Ehud Barak. He apparently has reached a ceasefire with Hamas. Israel's concerns include that the smaller Palestinian terrorist factions will not abide by a ceasefire and wants Hamas to stop all arms smuggling across Gaza's border with Sinai. Many voices in the Israeli government say Hamas will use this ceasefire to build up its forces in Gaza. The Israel Defense Force does not want any agreement that doesn't include Gilad Shalit's release. Hamas abducted him outside of the Gaza Strip in June the 25th, 2006. This weekend, we saw a sharp increase in Qassam rocket and mortar attacks here in Israel. It is understood as a sign from Hamas of what is coming if, underlined, Israel does not agree to the ceasefire proposal. Prime Minister Olmert said, either things quiet down or Israel will apply its full force to make them quiet down. The threat followed a weekend in which at least 24 rockets and mortars were fired at Israeli communities. We hold Hamas responsible for everything that has happened in Gaza, and we have no intention of putting up with the situation, warned Olmert. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take another long look at this picture. Try and see what is happening as though it were in your own neighborhood. There are neighbors next door who keep attacking you, stealing from you, robbing from your property, pestering you, destroying your peace, damaging your home, instilling fear into your children, and hampering your life on every level. Now, these neighborhood bullies are living just next door, and they have come up with a peace proposal and are now demanding that you comply with their requests. Excuse me, but what's wrong with this picture? There is a way to deal with ruffians, thieves, and manipulative terrorists, and the Bible has the wisdom we need today. This scripture describes how God deals with each human being. He is all wisdom and knowledge, and we need to know what kind of character He has. Listen to this when it comes to bullies in the neighborhood. God is not mocked. Here is another description of an enemy who wanted to take over the land of Israel. It says he was very furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And another scripture says, with the merciful, you, the God of Israel, will show yourself merciful. With the blameless man, you will show yourself blameless. With the pure, you will show yourself pure. And with the devious, you will show yourself shrewd, because God looks on the heart. Prime Minister Olmert's 5th criminal investigation while he's been in office is expected to turn up some concrete information to the public who have been left in the dark. It seems to cater around the misuse of donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the New Jerusalem Fund by American millionaire Morris Talansky. A public hearing is expected soon. It is expected that our Attorney General Menachem Manouz will come to a swift and concrete resolution soon. Michael Partin, speaking on behalf of the Movement for Quality Government, warned, Olmert's resignation will be a collective one, including his cabinet. The whole government has to ask itself if they can fulfill their ability to govern. Hamas, true to the picture of a bully, last night turned off 3 giant electrical producing turbines, leaving hundreds of thousands of their people in pitch-black darkness. It's a media ploy staged to blame Israel yet again. The very sad truth is that most of the world follows their every move and does blame Israel through their ignorance of the true situation exploding here. From Burma, we hear that 1.5 to 2 million are diseased and starving due to the cyclone disaster that has left the nation ravished. The military junta is refusing much of the international humanitarian relief. Nationals have spoken out and blamed their leaders of becoming rich on the aid that has been received. They are selling it and making it look as though they were saving their own people. However, a world-class Israeli medical team is there on location, 8 in all, also 2 people from IsraAid to help in any way they can. They are working to make a difference in this disaster. And the team describes the situation as desperate, and the unofficial death toll is now at 200,000 and 1.5 to 2 million injured. Even Weintraub, the executive director of Latet, says the cyclone is going to be like the tsunami of 2004 with the amount of people afflicted. They estimate that it will take years to rehabilitate the region. The UN has estimated the need for food will exceed 55,000 tons, with overall necessary aid estimated at 160 million. El Al, our national carrier, is flying in cargo shipments. In greatest demand are water and shelter equipment, followed by tents, blankets, mosquito nets, and basic clothing. The people have lost everything. Proud Jewish veterans of the former Soviet Army marched in full-dress uniform yesterday down the center of Jerusalem, commemorating 63 years since the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. We ask you to stay tuned to the following program, People Making a Difference, to hear the personal saga of 79-year-old Holocaust survivor who went through his ordeal as a child from 12 to 15. He was liberated from Mauthausen in Austria by Black Americans and has never forgotten the miracle of his survival. Why is it important that we never forget? Because mankind has a history of repeating its mistakes. If we are careful to educate our children against the sickness of Jew hatred, we do them a great service. Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper declared on our 60th Independence Day from Toronto, Canada stands alongside with the State of Israel, our friend and ally in the democratic family of nations. As the last World War showed, hate-fueled bigotry against some is ultimately a threat to us all and must be addressed wherever it may lurk. He told the cheering crowd of 7,000. He spoke shortly after Canadian Arabs throughout the country of Canada condemned Israel and marked al-Nakba, the Arabic term for catastrophe, referring to the reestablishment of Israel. How grateful I am as a Canadian Israeli to hear our Prime Minister speak out on Israel's behalf. Watch for our People Making a Difference following this news show when we interview Canadian Minister of Parliament, Dr. James Lunny. On that note, let's look at our prayer points. Number 1, yes, a terrorist war fueled and funded by Iran is raging once again in Lebanon. Pray for evil to be overturned. Number 2, Egypt is offering a peace initiative from Hamas. Pray for truth in the midst of lies and controversy. Number 3, pray for our justice system to quickly conclude the investigation against Prime Minister Olmert so that our government can be about the business of running Israel in the midst of unbelievable controversy from her neighbors. Number 4, pray for Burma's leaders to open the doors of their beleaguered nation for help to flood in from the nations. And number 5, pray for your governments. Pray for them to stand up for righteousness and truth. Write them letters. Number 6, finally, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's peace will usher in world peace. That is a promise from the Bible. And I thank you for being with us today. Thank you for making a difference right where you are. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station. Shalom.